Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. Captain Elias Carter awakens from a 30-year cryo-sleep aboard the damaged ship Nova Voyager, orbiting an uncharted planet. The ship's AI informs him that a malfunction caused them to miss their destination, and they are now stranded with no chance of escape. With the ship's systems failing, Elias is forced to eject to the planet's surface. He crash lands in a lush, vibrant jungle, surrounded by strange bioluminescent flora and eerie alien noises. Exhausted and unarmed, Elias is ambushed by a group of tall, elegant alien women who speak in an incomprehensible language. Their technology, though primitive-looking, is surprisingly effective, and they capture him. Elias is brought to their village, a stunning amalgamation of natural beauty and alien ingenuity. The tribe, called the Valithi, views him with suspicion, seeing him as a potential threat or omen. Through body language and gestures, he begins to understand their social structure, centered on a matriarchal hierarchy. The chief, a regal woman named Leora, declares that Elias must prove his worth through a series of trials. With no choice, he accepts, while secretly planning his escape. As Elias participates in the trials, he begins to learn about the Valithi's culture and struggles. Their world is harsh, and survival is dependent on teamwork and ingenuity. Despite his initial skepticism, Elias is drawn to their resourcefulness and kindness. He bonds with a curious young woman named Kaylin, who begins teaching him their language. His humanity and humor intrigue the Valithi, but a faction within the tribe views him as a threat, and sabotage looms. While proving himself, Elias uncovers signs of a predatory alien species threatening the Valithi. These creatures, called the Dreenak, are vicious and territorial, and the Valithi are barely holding them off. Elias realizes his knowledge of engineering and tactics could help them create better defenses. However, gaining their trust is no easy feat. Leora remains wary, and internal divisions among the tribe grow as some believe Elias will bring more harm than good. Elias convinces the Valithi to allow him to use the remains of his ship to craft weapons and defensive tools. With Kaylin's help, he creates rudimentary but effective devices to repel the Dreenak. However, the faction opposing him sabotages one of his projects, leading to a devastating raid on the village. Guilt-ridden but determined, Elias proposes a bold plan to lure the Dreenak into a trap. This plan will require the full cooperation of the Valithi. The trap is set, and Elias leads the Valithi in a desperate battle against the Dreenak. Using his human ingenuity and the Valithi's combat prowess, they manage to drive off the creatures, though not without casualties. Elias earns the respect of Leora and the tribe, but the victory is bittersweet. He reflects on the lives lost and the fragility of their survival. With the Dreenak defeated, Elias is offered a place among the Valithi. Though he longs for Earth, he realizes that he has found a purpose and a new family here. As he integrates into the tribe, Elias and Kaylin begin to grow closer, hinting at the potential for a deeper bond. The story ends with Elias looking out over the alien horizon, resolved to adapt and thrive in his new home. Captain Elias Carter jolted awake, the hiss of depressurizing cryopod filling his ears. Disoriented, he tried to focus on the blurry red warning lights flashing around him. AI-7, he croaked, his voice raspy from decades of stasis. Report status. The ship's AI responded in a soothing yet detached tone. Critical systems failure. Destination not reached. Current location. Uncharted planet. Designation unknown. Elias rubbed his temples, his head pounding from the abrupt awakening. He glanced at the console. Oxygen levels plummeting. Power reserves critically low. 30 years in cryosleep, only to wake up stranded. Options. Evacuation recommended. Escape pod operational. Minutes later, Elias strapped into the pod, clutching a basic survival kit. The planet's surface loomed below, a swirling canvas of green and blue. The descent was rough, the pod skimming treetops before slamming into the ground. Elias staggered out, taking in his surroundings. Towering trees glowed faintly, their leaves shimmering like gemstones. The air was thick and humid, filled with alien scents. As he inspected his kit, A rustle behind him made him freeze. He turned slowly, facing a group of tall, slender figures with shimmering, scaled skin. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and they held weapons that seemed cobbled together from bone and crystal. One stepped forward, her voice melodic yet unintelligible. Elias raised his hands, trying to convey he meant no harm. The alien woman regarded him with cold curiosity before issuing a command. In an instant, they surrounded him, binding his hands with a glowing cord. As they marched him through the jungle, Elias felt a mix of dread and wonder. He was an outsider in every sense, and his survival now depended on understanding this strange tribe. Elias stumbled as the Valithi warriors pushed him forward, their bioluminescent village materializing through the dense jungle. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. An intricate network of huts built into massive, glowing trees, connected by woven bridges. The village pulsed with life, its inhabitants moving gracefully amidst the alien architecture. As they entered the central clearing, a hush fell over the villagers. Dozens of glowing eyes turned toward Elias, their expressions a mixture of fear, curiosity, and hostility. The leader of his captors barked commands, and the crowd parted, revealing a platform carved from a single, massive stone. Standing atop it was the tallest of the Valithi, her posture regal and her gaze piercing. She wore a headdress adorned with iridescent feathers, and her scaled skin shimmered like polished metal. This was clearly their leader. Elias's instincts told him to remain still. Any sign of resistance would likely end badly. He glanced around, searching for a way to escape, but the sheer number of onlookers, and their weapons, made it clear that wasn't an option. The leader, whom he later learned was called Leora, raised a hand, silencing the murmuring crowd. She spoke in a melodic language, her tone authoritative yet calm. Elias couldn't understand the words, but her pointed gestures at him and the accusatory tone made her meaning clear. "Who are you, and why are you here?" Elias took a step forward, raising his hands in a universal sign of peace. "I don't mean any harm," he said slowly, enunciating each word as if that might make it comprehensible. "I'm just stranded, a traveler." Leora's expression didn't change, but the murmurs among the crowd grew louder. One of the warriors shoved Elias forward, forcing him to his knees. Leora's eyes narrowed, and she turned to address the crowd. The tone of her speech shifted, becoming harsher, more deliberate. Elias caught snippets of body language and inflection: outsider, threat, prove. The crowd erupted into cheers and chants, their voices rising in a rhythmic cadence. Elias's stomach sank. Whatever was happening, it wasn't a warm welcome. Leora stepped closer, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. She extended a hand, and one of the warriors handed her a staff tipped with a glowing blue crystal. She pointed it at Elias, then gestured to the surrounding jungle. "Trial," she said, her accent heavy but unmistakable. Elias blinked. "You understand me?" She didn't respond but continued gesturing toward the jungle. The word was clear enough. They wanted him to prove something: his strength, his worth, or perhaps just his survival instinct. The warriors untied his hands and pushed a crude spear into them. Its shaft was rough, and the tip looked like it had been hastily sharpened. Leora nodded toward the jungle, then stepped back, her eyes never leaving his. Elias took a deep breath, gripping the spear tightly. His instincts screamed to run, but he knew better. These people wouldn't respect a coward. With a curt nod, he turned and trudged toward the dense underbrush, the weight of dozens of glowing eyes on his back. The jungle was alive with sound: chirps, growls, and the distant roar of some massive creature. Elias moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. His heart pounded as he pushed through the thick vegetation, the bioluminescent plants casting an eerie glow on his path. He didn't have to wait long for trouble. A guttural growl came from his right, and he spun just in time to see a predator emerge from the shadows. It was a six-legged beast, its sleek body covered in dark, iridescent scales. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto him, and it bared razor-sharp fangs. "Great," Elias muttered, Because this day wasn't bad enough already, the beast lunged, and Elias barely dodged, the creature's claws raking the air where he'd just stood. He stumbled backward, raising the spear defensively. The creature circled him, its movements fluid and predatory. Elias knew he couldn't outrun it, not in this terrain. He needed to outthink it. He scanned the area, noting a cluster of thick vines hanging from a tree. An idea formed in his mind, reckless but better than waiting to be eaten. The beast lunged again, and Elias sidestepped, using the spear to jab at its side. The tip glanced off its scales, but the force of the blow made it hesitate. Taking advantage of the moment, Elias sprinted toward the vines, grabbing one and scrambling up the tree. The creature snarled, leaping after him, but its bulk made climbing difficult. Elias worked quickly, tying the vines into a crude snare. As the beast clawed its way up, Elias swung around, using his weight to loop the vine over a sturdy branch. With a desperate pull, he tightened the snare around the creature's neck. The beast thrashed, its snarls turning to panicked yelps as it struggled against the trap. Elias held on, his muscles burning, until the creature finally went limp. Breathing hard, he slid down the tree and looked at his handiwork. The beast was subdued but alive, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Elias grinned despite himself. Trial complete. He dragged the unconscious creature back toward the village, his exhaustion outweighed by a growing sense of determination. Whatever the Valithi wanted from him, he'd just proven he wasn't going down without a fight. When he entered the clearing, dragging the beast behind him, the crowd fell silent. Leora stepped forward, her eyes widening slightly in what might have been surprise. Elias dropped the spear and gestured to the beast. "I think this covers it." Leora studied him for a moment, then raised the glowing staff. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Elias couldn't help but smile. He'd survived the first trial. Elias sat on a flat stone near the center of the Valithi village, his muscles aching from the trial. Around him, the villagers moved with renewed energy, talking animatedly about the outsider who had subdued the jungle beast. Their glowing eyes darted his way frequently, some with cautious curiosity, others with outright suspicion. The creature he'd subdued lay restrained nearby, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The Valithi didn't kill it, much to Elias's surprise. Instead, they tethered it with their glowing cords, treating it with a blend of reverence and fear. Kaelin, the young woman who had taken an interest in him, approached with a bowl of what appeared to be food. Her scaled skin shimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes were wide with curiosity. She crouched a few feet away, setting the bowl down carefully before retreating to a safe distance. "Thanks," Elias said, nodding as he picked up the bowl. The contents were a mushy blend of purple and green, emitting a faint herbal scent. Hesitant, he took a small bite. The flavor was earthy and slightly sweet, a far cry from the nutrient packs he'd lived on during his journey. Kaelin tilted her head, watching him closely. She tapped her chest and said, "Kaelin." Elias mimicked her gesture. "Kaelin." A hint of a smile crossed her lips before she pointed at him, waiting expectantly. "Elias," he said, tapping his own chest. Kaelin repeated the name, her accent making it sound musical. Encouraged, Elias pointed at the glowing cords binding the beast and then to Kaelin, raising his eyebrows in a questioning gesture. She hesitated, glancing toward the village center where Leora and several elders were gathered. Then she leaned closer and whispered a single word. "Sereth." "Sereth," Elias repeated, glancing at the creature. It stirred slightly, growling low in its throat. Kaelin nodded and made a slashing motion with her hand, followed by a sweeping gesture that encompassed the village. The message was clear. The Sereth were a danger to the Valithi. Elias's curiosity grew. He gestured to himself, mimicking the motions of the trial, climbing, trapping, and returning with the beast. Then he pointed at Leora and raised his hands, palms up. "Why?" Kaelin seemed to understand. She mimicked a tall figure, spreading her arms wide as if commanding the world, then pointed at Leora. She followed this by mimicking a figure struggling, bound by unseen forces, and pointed at him. Prove, Elias muttered to himself. I'm proving I'm not a threat. Or that I can help. Kalen smiled faintly, nodding as if to say, you're learning. As the day passed, Elias began to observe the Valithi more closely. They lived in harmony with their environment, using the glowing flora for light and the abundant resources of the jungle for food and shelter. The children played among the trees, their laughter ringing through the air, while the adults worked on weaving, crafting, and preparing food. Despite their seemingly peaceful existence, there was an undercurrent of tension. The warriors patrolled the edges of the village, their weapons always within reach. The captured Seraph was a constant reminder of the dangers lurking in the jungle. Elias's attention was drawn back to Kalen, who had returned with a small, intricate device. She held it out to him, her expression eager. What's this? Elias asked, taking the object. It was a strange amalgamation of crystal and metal, no bigger than his palm. Kalen motioned for him to press a button. Hesitant, Elias did so, and the device emitted a soft hum. A translucent image appeared above it, a rough map of the surrounding jungle. Whoa, Elias breathed, turning the device in his hands. A holographic map? Kalen pointed at the map and then to him, her expression serious. She tapped an area near the edge of the projection and made a snapping motion with her hands, followed by mimicking claws raking the air. Elias frowned. The Seraph? They're here? Kalen nodded and pointed again, this time mimicking the warriors' patrols. They're getting closer, Elias muttered. Kalen's urgency was clear. The Seraph weren't just a nuisance. They were a growing threat. Later that evening, Elias was summoned to the central platform. Leora stood with the elders, her commanding presence undiminished. She gestured for him to approach, her expression unreadable. Elias stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the village on him. Leora spoke in her melodic language, her tone deliberate. She gestured to the holographic map Kalen had shown him, then to the restrained Seraph. She wants me to fight them again, Elias guessed aloud, glancing at Kalen, who had joined the gathering. Kalen shook her head, stepping forward to clarify. She pointed at Elias, mimicked fixing something, then gestured to the village. She wants me to help fortify the village? Elias asked, trying to piece it together. Kalen nodded, her expression serious. Leora raised her staff, her gaze piercing. The meaning was clear. Elias had passed the first trial, but his real test was just beginning. If he was to prove his worth, he needed to show the Valithi that he could help them survive the looming threat. Elias straightened, meeting Leora's gaze. I'll do it, he said, even though she wouldn't understand his words. His determination was clear enough. As the gathering dispersed, Kalen lingered, giving him an encouraging nod. Elias stared out at the jungle, the glow of the village lights illuminating the horizon. He had come to this planet as an outsider, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of purpose. If he could help these people, maybe being stranded here wouldn't be the end of his story. It could be the beginning of something greater. The night was unnervingly quiet. The usual symphony of alien insects and distant animal calls had quieted, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Elias sat by a small fire at the edge of the village, his mind racing. The Valithi were resourceful, but they were vulnerable, especially now with the Seraph drawing closer. The holographic map Kalen had shown him was still fresh in his mind. The red zones were growing larger, creeping closer to the village. The Valithi needed more than just defense, they needed a plan. But Elias wasn't sure where to begin. His training was in starship engineering, not guerrilla warfare or alien combat strategies. Yet, his mind kept returning to the concept of adaptability, one thing humanity excelled at. It was why they had survived across countless worlds, why they had thrived in places where others had failed. The crackling of the fire pulled him from his thoughts. Kalen approached, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the flames. She carried a bundle of dried herbs and a carved knife, offering him a silent greeting. "You've been working all day," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You should rest." Elias chuckled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. I don't think I'll be getting much rest anytime soon. The Seraph are out there and they're getting too close. He gestured toward the jungle, then pointed to the village, his brows furrowed in thought. Kaelin nodded, her expression serious. She kneeled beside him and began unrolling the bundle of herbs, which filled the air with a pleasant fragrance. She cut them with practiced precision, laying them carefully on a flat stone. The Seraph are clever, she said, not looking up as she worked. They've been pushing the boundaries of the jungle. They know how to avoid our traps, how to strike in the dark. They've grown bold, desperate. Elias's mind clicked into gear. Desperation was a dangerous thing. If the Seraph were becoming more aggressive, it meant they were feeling the pressure of something, hunger, perhaps, or competition. Whatever the reason, the Valithi couldn't afford to wait and hope for the best. They needed to be proactive, not reactive. Are they the only threat? Elias asked. Or are there others? Kaelin paused, looking up at him with wide eyes. Her lips parted as if about to speak but closed again. She seemed uncertain, as if unsure whether to reveal what she knew. After a long silence, she spoke softly. The Seraph are the worst of them. But there are others. Not as large, not as dangerous. But they have their own ways of hunting. We've been at peace with the jungle for many seasons. But something has changed. Elias felt a chill settle over him. What do you mean? Something else is out there. Kaelin's gaze flickered nervously toward the jungle before she lowered her voice. The sky has changed. The stars, they look different. Not the same as before. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had dismissed it at first, the disorientation of waking up after 30 years of cryosleep. But now he realized it was more than just a confused sense of time. There was something off about the sky, something that didn't fit. Before he could respond, Kaelin's attention snapped back to the jungle. A distant growl echoed through the trees, followed by a series of frantic screeches. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Kaelin grabbed her knife and stood, eyes narrowed. We need to move, she said urgently. The Seraph are closer than I thought. They've come in full force. Elias's pulse quickened. He grabbed his spear and followed her toward the heart of the village. The Valithi warriors were already assembling, the women donning intricate armor made of woven plant fibers and bone. Their eyes were sharp, alert, ready for battle. Leora stood at the front of the warriors, her commanding presence unmistakable. She scanned the jungle with a focused intensity. When she saw Elias, she gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod, signaling for him to approach. What's the plan? Elias asked as he joined her. Leora's voice was low, controlled. The Seraph are pushing in from the south. We will hold the line here, but we must be ready to retreat if necessary. Their numbers are greater than ours. She glanced toward the trees. We need to drive them back. Do you have any suggestions? Elias hesitated, trying to ignore the rising tension in his chest. He was out of his element, a human among a tribe of alien warriors. Yet he had a survival instinct honed through decades of space exploration, and now it was kicking into overdrive. Trap them, he said, his voice steady. Use their aggression against them. If we know their approach, we can funnel them into a bottleneck. Force them to move through a narrow area, where we have the advantage. Leora's brow furrowed, but then her gaze softened, as if she was seeing him for the first time not as an outsider, but as an ally. We can do that, she said, voice filled with quiet respect. She turned to the warriors, giving rapid commands in the Valithi language. The warriors quickly fanned out, preparing the defenses, creating obstacles, and setting traps designed to isolate and contain the Seraph. As the preparations were underway, Elias joined Kaelin near the edge of the village. She was adjusting the glowstones along the perimeter. Small, powerful orbs that emitted a soft light, capable of blinding their enemies or luring them into traps. The Seraph are not as simple as they seem, Kaelin muttered as she worked. They learn, adapt. That's why we've been struggling. Elias nodded. I figured as much. But I think we can turn that against them. He paused. Have you ever considered using fire? Kaelin looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Fire? Fire disrupts a lot of things, Elias said. It's not just a weapon. It's a signal. It can break their concentration, scare them off, or push them into the traps we set. Could be the edge we need. Kalen regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Fire, yes, could work. We can use the glowstones to amplify it. The Valithi warriors were already finishing their preparations. Elias could feel the tension in the air as the growls of the Seraph grew louder, closer. The first wave was coming, and the Valithi were ready. We fight together, Leora said, her voice a low command, before turning to the warriors and raising her staff. For the tribe, Elias echoed, gripping his spear tightly. As the first of the Seraph broke through the undergrowth, Elias felt his heart race. The battle had begun. The jungle was alive with sound, growls, screeches, and the heavy rustle of leaves as the Seraph emerged from the shadows, their glowing yellow eyes burning with hunger. Elias stood beside Leora and Kalen, watching as the warriors took their positions, blending into the foliage like shadows themselves. The tension was palpable. He could feel it in his chest, the weight of what was about to unfold. The first Seraph appeared, its sleek body slithering through the trees like a shadow, its 6 legs making no noise as it moved. It stopped, sniffing the air, its head twitching as it detected the faintest movement from the warriors hidden in the brush. Elias held his breath, watching it closely. It was fast, too fast, but it was also focused, too focused on the immediate area. He was counting on that. The plan was simple: draw them in, force them into the bottleneck. But the Seraph were clever. They wouldn't just fall for a basic trap. Leora's hand shot up, signaling the first phase. With a burst of movement, several warriors let out sharp, bird-like calls, their voices high-pitched and piercing. The sound cut through the night like a razor. The Seraph immediately froze, their heads swiveling to the source of the noise. It was the perfect distraction. Kalen's hand went to a pouch at her side, pulling out several small, glowing stones. With practiced precision, she hurled them into the air. They burst into bright, fiery orbs, casting intense light across the clearing. The Seraph, disoriented and now vulnerable, began to move toward the glowing light, their instincts pushing them toward what they perceived as the source of danger. The warriors struck then, darting from the shadows with blinding speed, their spears and knives flashing in the light. The Seraph responded with ferocity, their massive jaws snapping and their claws slashing through the air. Elias could hear the impact of their claws against the trees, the rustling as they fought to stay upright. But it was the fire that changed everything. Elias watched as the warriors set fire to the trees near the bottleneck, using the natural oils in the flora to spread the flames. The fire blazed up, creating an impassable wall between the Seraph and the village. The creatures recoiled at the heat, their instincts pulling them back. The glowstones flared up around them, forcing the Seraph into a confined space where their numbers no longer gave them the advantage. Elias raised his spear, watching as the creatures tried to claw their way through the fire. They were trapped, and now was the time to strike. He charged forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The first Seraph he encountered was larger than any of the others, its scales gleaming in the flickering firelight. It turned toward him with a screech, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Elias didn't hesitate. He lunged, thrusting the spear toward its throat. The creature's movements were quick, but Elias had the element of surprise. The spear sank deep into the Seraph's flesh, and with a mighty heave, Elias twisted the weapon, pulling it free as the beast staggered backward, roaring in pain. It didn't go down easily. The creature swiped at him with its claws, and Elias had only a split second to dive to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. He rolled to his feet, raising his spear again, but before he could strike, Kalen appeared at his side, her blade flashing as she took down another Seraph that had tried to flank them. "Stay close," she shouted, her voice sharp. "We push them back now. Don't let them regroup." Elias nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. His hands were slick around the spear, but his focus was sharp. The battle wasn't over. The Seraph were still pushing, still fighting to break free. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He charged again, this time with Kalen at his side, and together they took down one seraph after another, each strike more precise than the last. The fire behind them burned brighter, the glowstones now turning the night into a battlefield of light and shadow. Elias could see the fear in the seraph's eyes, but he knew that their desperation made them more dangerous. As the battle raged on, Elias began to understand how the Valithi fought. Not as individuals, but as a single unit, a living organism that adapted and reacted as one. They moved like a symphony, each warrior playing their part, creating openings for each other, covering one another's blind spots. Elias was no longer just an outsider. He was becoming part of that rhythm. The seraph had regrouped, and now they were pushing from all sides, their glowing eyes narrowing in on the weak points in the defense. Elias could see them closing in on a small group of Valithi warriors, their backs to the fire. Without thinking, he broke from Kalen, rushing to help. He dove into the fray, thrusting his spear into the side of a seraph that had nearly taken down one of the younger warriors. The creature shrieked in pain, but Elias didn't give it a chance to retaliate. He twisted the spear, driving it deeper. As the creature fell, he turned to face the others. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Leora's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. To the village now. The warriors, already beginning to tire, fell back toward the village, retreating to the heart of their defenses. Elias could feel the weight of the moment. If they didn't hold the line now, the seraph would break through, and the Valithi would be defenseless. He turned, ready to follow the others, but something stopped him. He saw Kalen fighting further out, her blade flashing as she took on two seraph at once. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and in that instant, he saw the same determination reflected in her gaze. But there was something more there, a flicker of fear. Elias's heart raced. He couldn't leave her behind. Ignoring the orders to retreat, he ran toward her, his spear raised. He slammed into the first seraph just as it was about to strike, driving the spear into its side. The creature shrieked, but Elias didn't stop. He lunged at the second seraph, knocking it back with a swift blow. Kalen, breathing hard, gave him a grateful nod. "We're almost there," she said, before turning to face the final creature. Together, they made their way back to the village, fighting side by side. As they reached the edge of the firelight, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This battle was far from over, but for now, they had survived. The battle raged through the night, but as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the seraph were in retreat. The fire burned low, crackling softly as its last embers sent occasional bursts of light across the village. The Valithi warriors were exhausted but victorious. The jungle was eerily quiet again, though the distant growls of the seraph could still be heard, retreating back into the depths of the jungle. Elias stood at the edge of the village, his body sore and covered in scratches, his breath heavy as he took in the aftermath. His spear was coated in the blood of the creatures, but the adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving him with an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Kalen stood beside him, her armor scuffed but still intact. She wiped her blade clean with a cloth, her movements steady but filled with an exhaustion that matched his own. "You fought well," Kalen said, her voice hoarse from the battle. "I didn't think you had it in you." Elias chuckled softly, though it was laced with fatigue. "Neither did I, to be honest." He glanced over his shoulder at the village, where the wounded were being tended to by the others. You saved me a couple of times back there." Kalen gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We fight together. That's how it works." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the Valithi began to regroup, checking on their fallen and tending to their injured. Despite their success, the atmosphere was heavy with the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. The seraph were still out there, and they would return. The village needed to be reinforced, the warriors needed to rest, and the people needed a plan. Leora appeared, moving toward them with purpose. Her face was grim, her usual commanding demeanor even more imposing now. Elias could see the weight of leadership pressing down on her. She came to a stop before him and Kaelin, her eyes scanning the battlefield, her gaze lingering on the retreating Seraph in the distance. The battle was won, Leora said, her voice low but firm. But this is far from over. The Seraph are not finished. They will regroup and they will come again. Elias nodded, knowing the truth of her words. The Valithi had fought hard, but the Seraph had proven that they could learn, adapt, and strike when least expected. What's our next move? He asked, eager to get some sense of direction. Leora's eyes shifted to the sky, her expression distant as she seemed to gather her thoughts. We must reinforce our defenses. The fire has slowed them, but it will not stop them for long. We need to fortify our position, create new traps, and ensure that we can hold the jungle's edge. I have seen signs that their numbers are swelling. Something is drawing them closer to our village. Kaelin shifted uneasily. Do you think they have a leader? Something or someone pulling them together? Leora gave a curt nod. I suspect so. The Seraph are not mindless creatures. They have a hierarchy. I've seen it in their movements, in how they strike. There is a mind guiding them. Elias's brow furrowed. The thought of a single force directing the Seraph was unsettling. If there was a leader, something behind the chaos, then it was only a matter of time before they faced a much more organized and deadly assault. He turned to Leora, his mind racing. What do you suggest we do? He asked, his voice resolute. We must find this leader, identify its motives, and understand its strength, Leora replied. If we strike at the heart of the Seraph, we can weaken them. But to do that, we must know what we're dealing with. Her eyes met Elias's. That is where you come in. Elias blinked, momentarily confused. Me? How? You have been to the farthest reaches of the stars. Have you not? Leora asked, her tone pragmatic. You understand strategy, you have seen alien forces at work. We are a simple people. We fight by instinct, by tradition. You are different. You think differently. Your kind has survived and thrived in places where others failed. We need that perspective. Elias took a deep breath, considering her words. He had never seen himself as a strategist. His survival skills were born from the raw necessity of staying alive in hostile environments, but leading a people in war. That was another matter entirely. Still, he couldn't ignore the pull to help them. He had been thrust into this conflict, and there was no turning back. I'll help, Elias said finally. I don't have much experience with this sort of thing, but I know we can't afford to wait for them to come back. Leora's expression softened for a moment, a rare gesture of approval. Good. We will work together, then. Tomorrow we begin scouting. We will find their base of operations and assess their leader. We cannot let them catch us off guard again. Kaelin, standing beside him, gave a nod of agreement. We'll need the support of the whole tribe for this. It won't be just the warriors on this mission. Elias turned to her, understanding her meaning. The Valithi had a deep connection to the land, and their knowledge of the jungle's hidden paths and dangers could be invaluable in their search for the Seraph's leader. All right, he said. We'll work together. Everyone. Fighters, scouts, anyone who knows this jungle, will be a part of this. Leora placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. We are grateful for your help, Elias. The Valithi do not often seek help from outsiders. But your presence here has proven that not all those who are different are enemies. Kaelin, who had been quiet, looked at Elias with a mixture of admiration and something else, something deeper that he couldn't quite place. We'll make it through this, she said softly. Elias met her gaze. Together, as the sun began to rise higher, casting light over the village and the jungle beyond, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Seraph weren't just an isolated threat. They were a symptom of something far more complex. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting in the shadows for the right moment to strike. And now that moment had come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But Elias was more determined than ever to fight for the Valithi, and to find out what lay behind the Seraph's sudden aggression. The jungle held its secrets, and Elias was determined to uncover them. The dawn had barely risen when the Valithi gathered in the clearing just outside the village. ready to embark on the mission that would determine their fate. Elias stood among them, his mind heavy with the weight of their task. The jungle was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a battleground, and the Seraph were its relentless predators. He had been thrust into this war, but now he was beginning to feel that it was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the very future of the Valithi. Leora stood before the group, her posture straight and commanding. She surveyed the gathered warriors, Kalen among them, and then turned to Elias. Her expression was solemn, the gravity of the situation clear in her eyes. "We head into the heart of the jungle," Leora said, her voice steady, yet heavy with resolve. "We will find the Seraph's leader. We will end this threat once and for all." The warriors nodded in unison, their faces hard and determined. Elias felt a surge of pride. They were no longer just a tribe of alien women. They were a force to be reckoned with, and he was a part of that force. "Stay close," Leora continued. "We will move in a tight formation. The jungle is alive, and we must remain alert at all times. Kalen, Elias, you will lead the way." She looked directly at them. "Your eyes are trained for this, Elias. You know how to navigate hostile territory." Elias didn't argue. He had learned quickly how to read the jungle's subtle signals. The way the leaves swayed, the way the air felt. Heavier before a storm, the distant sounds that hinted at danger. He nodded in acknowledgement, signaling Kalen to lead the way. The group set off, moving through the dense underbrush with practiced ease. Kalen led them through a series of narrow paths, winding through the thick foliage that seemed to close in around them with each step. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the jungle became. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the forest grew hushed, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay sharp," he whispered to Kalen as they pushed forward. She nodded, her eyes scanning their surroundings, her every movement fluid and calculated. After several hours of tense travel, the group arrived at the edge of a wide clearing. In the center, a massive structure loomed, an alien monolith, half buried in the earth and covered in vines. It looked ancient, its surface etched with strange symbols that Elias couldn't decipher. The Seraph had clearly made it their base, but it wasn't just their headquarters. It felt like something more. "This is it," Elias muttered under his breath, taking a cautious step toward the structure. His instincts screamed at him that there was more to this place than just the Seraph. Kalen caught his eye and motioned for him to stay back. She crouched low to the ground, her keen senses alert. Elias followed her lead, crouching beside her as they studied the monolith. The air around it was charged, a subtle but undeniable hum that seemed to resonate deep within his chest. Leora and the other warriors crouched behind them, their eyes locked on the monolith, waiting for the signal to advance. It was clear that this was the heart of the Seraph's operation, but something about it unsettled Elias. This place felt like a tomb, a place of forgotten power, a relic from an ancient time. "What is this place?" Kalen asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but I think we're about to find out." Before they could move closer, the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, just a vibration through the earth. But then the tremors grew stronger, more pronounced, until the very air seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Elias's heart skipped a beat as a deep, guttural roar echoed from within the monolith. "Ambush!" Leora shouted, her voice filled with urgency. A swarm of Seraph erupted from the shadows of the jungle, surrounding them in an instant. The warriors leaped into action, drawing their weapons and engaging the creatures with fluid, deadly precision. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed his spear and charged into the fray, his focus entirely on the enemy in front of him. But it wasn't just the Seraph they had to contend with. From the depths of the monolith, a massive shape emerged, a towering creature, unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Its body was a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical parts, with dark, jagged armor plating and glowing red eyes that burned with malice. The Seraph parted before it, revering it as though it were a god. Elias froze, This was no ordinary Seraph leader. It's a hybrid, Kaelin said, her voice tense. Part creature, part machine. But what? The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, and it let out a deafening screech that sent ripples of fear through the warriors. It was a primal, guttural sound, but beneath it, there was something more, an intelligence, a purpose. The Seraph leader's red eyes locked onto Elias, and he could feel the weight of its gaze, as though it was searching his very soul. For a moment time seemed to freeze. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, the creature lunged toward him, its claws raking the air. Elias barely dodged in time, feeling the rush of wind as the claws missed him by mere inches. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike, and sprang to his feet. "Kaelin! Leora!" Elias shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos of battle. The hybrid Seraph slashed again, its mechanical limbs moving with terrifying precision. Elias ducked under the creature's attack, his spear raised high. It was a machine, but it was also alive in a way that he had never encountered before. This was no mere beast. It was a weapon, a tool of war. The Valithi warriors were fighting valiantly, but they were struggling to hold their ground. The Seraph were endless, pouring from every corner of the jungle, while the hybrid leader pressed its assault relentlessly. Elias could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he surveyed the scene. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle for the very future of the Valithi, and for the survival of the jungle itself. He had no choice. He had to act. With a roar of determination, Elias charged toward the hybrid Seraph, weaving between the other Seraph as he made his way to its side. He wasn't going to let this creature destroy everything the Valithi had fought for. The moment he reached it, he threw himself into the fray, his spear striking at the creature's exposed underbelly. It screeched in fury, its mechanical limbs whirling around as it tried to counter his attack. For a moment, Elias saw the creature's eyes flicker, a brief flash of recognition. It wasn't just a mindless weapon. It had a purpose, just like him. And that was the key. With a final, desperate lunge, Elias drove his spear into the creature's chest, right where its core thrummed with unnatural energy. The hybrid Seraph let out a final, blood-curdling scream as it collapsed, its body convulsing as sparks flew from its mechanical joints. The jungle fell silent. The battle was over. Elias stood there, panting, his spear dripping with the hybrid's blood, as the Valithi warriors gathered around him. The Seraph, now leaderless, began to retreat into the jungle, their aggressive advance stalling. Leora stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You did it. You ended it." Elias looked down at the hybrid's lifeless body. "We did it," he said, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. Together, as the Valithi began to regroup and tend to the wounded, Elias felt a sense of closure. They had fought and won. But the real battle, the one for their future, was just beginning. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.